بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. We continue today our discussion of the second principle, and this is a principle related to unity in the religion and the absence of splitting and differing, or the prohibition of splitting and differing. And in the lesson last week, we spent most of the time just looking at the various sects which appeared in the first century, the four main sects, the Khawarij, the Rafida, the Qadariyah, and the Murji'ah. And from the second century onwards, we looked at how numerous orientations, numerous new thoughts and ideas and approaches entered into the Muslim nation. And from those approaches include the following. First of all, Ilmul Kalam, which is basically an innovated way in speaking about Allah's names and His attributes. And this was something that previous nations already fell into, the Jews, the Christians, and they'd also been affected by the sciences of the Greeks. And then they tried to use these sciences in order to interpret their books. So this was already there before Islam, and then when Islam came and it expanded and it came into contact with Christians and Jews, there were some ignorant people who, through the route of debating and arguing, they picked up some of these ideas and brought them into Islam. Likewise, the beginnings of Sufism in the form of Tasawwuf, beginning first of all in the form of exaggeration in worship, exaggeration in fear, in exaggeration in love. And from this starting point, over the centuries, it developed into something which had, outright doctrines or beliefs of disbelief, of kufr. So this was tasawwuf. Likewise, was also falsafa, which is philosophy, due to the translation of many of the works of the Greek, not only the Greeks but also the Persians and the Hindus, in the various sciences. First of all, in the various sciences like astronomy and and then also this slowly began to affect the religion as well. Also, the idea of hidden interpretation of the texts. We mentioned the sect called the Batiniyah. The Batiniyah, those people who claim that there is esoteric or secret hidden knowledge which is only known to the elite, not to the common people. And so these movements set in motion, they had their roots and had their foundations in the first century, and then they appeared as fully formed groups in the fourth, third and fourth centuries thereafter. Also, we spoke about this rigidity in opinions, rigidity in viewpoints in the affairs of the rulings and worship and things like that, in the form of ra'i, opinion, and making your opinion to clash with the hadith of the Messenger of Allah when there's a clear hadith where there's no ambiguity about the ruling. You use your opinion, you give it a higher worth or a higher value. And so this tendency appeared and developed, and over time it led to a rigidity in sticking to a particular school of thought, and as a result you oppose the sunnah or you neglect the sunnah. The point being from the previous lesson was really to show, and a lot more can be said, this differing and splitting increased as the centuries passed by, and even worse doctrines of outright disbelief appeared later on. So we return to Sheikh Muhammad Aman al-Jami's commentary, and so he's going to speak about some of this. I'm going to quickly go through that. He speaks about some of these sects, and we'll work through his commentary, inshallah, to the end of what he has written. So, he says that this differing in the foundations of the religion is something which happened after the virtuous generations, or the best of generations, meaning the companions, their students, the tabi'een, and their students, the tabi'een. So these sects appeared, and so really we're talking about the Umayyad dynasty. So the first ruling dynasty in Islam was the Umayyad dynasty, right? So just to briefly explain, first of all, we have the Khilafah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the rulership of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? This is the prophetic Khilafah during his lifetime. Now, when he passed away, then the rightly guided Khilafah, the rightly guided rulership, lasted for 30 years after him, for 30 years. So the leadership of Abu Bakr, Uthman, Umar Afwan, Uthman, and Ali radiallahu anhum, that lasted 30 years. And this was known as the Khilafah al-Rashida, the rightly guided Khilafah. After those 30 years was the first dynasty, the start of kingship, and Muawiyah was the first king of the Muslims. And as the Messenger of Allah he said that after the the rightly guided Khilafah, after the this blessed period, there will be a kingship in which there is mercy, there is rahmah. This will be a kingship in which there is mercy. So this is referring to the beginning of the Umayyad dynasty. This lasted for roughly about 80 or so years, right? So after those 30 years, another 80 years on top of that, 90 years in fact. In fact, you could stretch it to just under 100 years, So the Umayyad dynasty came to an end around 120 Hijrah, about 120. So it's about 100 years it lasted for. And so in this period of the Umayyad dynasty, there was all the sects that the Khawarij, the Rafida, the Qadariyah, the Murji'ah, Ilmul Kalam appeared, Tasawwuf, most of these issues began to appear, or their roots began to appear. After the Umayyad dynasty was the Abbasid dynasty. And this lasted for roughly about another 600 years or so. And in this period, the Abbasid period, then not only was there, increased splitting in terms of the foundations of the religion, but likewise also the Muslim nation split into various, states and sub-states and various empires, and it fell into political disunity as well. And obviously there are many factors and many reasons behind all of this, and the splitting and differing in the foundations of the religion is a reason, is one of the main reasons behind all of that. So the Sheikh says that this splitting began to appear at the end of the blessed period, the end of the righteous generations, and then this increased in the period of the Abbasids, in the Abbasid Khilafah. And the Sheikh then goes on to mention some of the main reasons for this. One of them is the spread of Ilmul Kalam, as we already discussed. Ilmul Kalam, this speculative theology, this speculative way of speaking about Allah, His names and attributes, and also the appearance of Tasawwuf, which is the roots of Sufism. So then the Shaykh goes on to mention about this Sufism in very briefly, how it appeared in Iraq, in a place called Basra in Iraq. And as we said, it began first of all just by people being abstemious from the world, keeping away from the world, being devoted to worship, and then exaggerating in that regard. And from the starting point, it then led to more and more serious affairs in terms of innovations in belief, outright, some of them which were outright disbelief, and likewise many innovations in worship as well. Some of the deviant beliefs which appeared out of Sufism is a belief called Wahdatul Wujud, which means the unity of existence. The unity of existence. And that means that everything that exists is the creator. Everything in existence is the creator. In other words, there's no such thing as the creator and the created. To them, to these people, Tawheed was to believe in the unity of existence, that there's only one existence, and this is Tawheed. Everything is just simply a manifestation of Allah the Creator. Right? So this obviously is a belief of outright disbelief and polytheism, and what it implies is that everything worshipped by anybody is Allah. So all the idols worshipped, they are Allah. All the animals which are worshipped by whatever religion, that is Allah. Because you cannot distinguish between the creator and the created. It is all one existence. No matter what you worship, no matter what religion you follow, you are a worshipper of Allah. So this is outright disbelief, and this appeared among the Sufis starting from the 5th, 6th, 7th centuries. Sheikh mentions a number of names which come up often in this regard. From them is Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi, this was a man from Al-Andalus, and he was one of the proponents of this idea. Likewise, Ibn al-Farid is another one. Ibn Sab'in. Some of these people, in fact, even made a claim to either prophethood, or they claimed to have a status superior than prophethood. And that's because some of these people claimed that they continue receiving revelation from the ever-living. So in other words, that the prophets and messengers have died, that revelation has been cut off. And as for what they receive by way of their Sufism and direct inspiration from Allah, this is superior because it never cuts off. So some of these people went to that level. Ibn Sab'in is another name. So these people, when they came, they corrupted the religion of tens of thousands of people. They led them to these doctrines of disbelief and confused them in their religion. So this was tasawwuf. And likewise, the Shaykh mentions in the topic of al-aqidah, we already spoke about ilmul kalam in the previous lesson, and this grew in the Abbasid period. Then there appeared the Ash'aris, and after them the Maturidis, and they created a lot of confusion amongst the people in the affairs of their aqidah as well, in numerous fields, in the affair of names and attributes, in the affair of iman, what is iman, in the affair of qadar, the affair of the divine decree, and so on and so forth. In any case, the Shaykh goes on to mention the Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila were a group, and they also brought their foundations. They brought many innovated foundations in the religion. This group, known as the Mu'tazila, they had 5 foundations. They called Usoolussittah-lesson5. And each of these foundations, when you look at it, it is presented as truth, but what they mean by it is, falsehood. So, for example, there are 5 foundations of the Mu'tazila are as follows. Number 1, they said, our foundation, the first of our foundations, is Tawheed. We believe in Tawheed. What they really mean is to deny Allah's names and attributes, or to deny His attributes. They said that if you affirm attributes for Allah, if you say Allah has mercy, has knowledge, has wisdom, This means you are now setting up multiple deities alongside Allah, right? So they treated his attributes as something, as another entity, right? And this is false, because when you describe a man and you say this man is kind and generous and patient and wise, just because there are multiple attributes does not mean that there are multiple entities, right? And so when these people, when they said our foundation is Tawheed, what do they actually mean by Tawheed? They actually mean something which is false. They mean that we have to negate and deny that Allah has any attributes, otherwise Allah would not be one. And this is a false understanding of Tawheed, because Allah describes himself with many attributes and many actions. So this is why we have to understand that in the Muslim nation, when it split in the way that it did, many people held onto ideas and beliefs that they believed to be the truth, but they were outright falsehood. And then they gave them the labels that the Sharia has come with, right? So like the Mu'tazila, they gave this idea of theirs the label of Tawheed, but this is not Tawheed. This is not the Tawheed of the messengers. This is outright falsehood. So when you see the same thing is happening in many different fields of knowledge or fields of belief as well, you can just start to conceive and imagine the type of confusion which entered into this Muslim nation as a result of all of this. Anyway, this is the first foundation of the Mu'tazila. This group, the Mu'tazila, they appeared in the beginning of the 2nd century of Islam, and they are the ones who eventually, when we come to the time of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, they were involved in persecuting Imam Ahmad and many thousands of the scholars of the people of the Sunnah. So this is their first principle. Negation of the attributes to them is Tawheed. Secondly, the second principle, they called it Al-Adl. Al-Adl meaning justice. Al-Adl, it means justice. What do they really mean by this term? What they really mean by this term is to deny Al-Qadr. To deny Al-Qadr. Deny Allah's divine decree. That Allah knows everything, that Allah has written everything down, that Allah wills things to occur, and Allah creates things and brings them into existence. That Allah is the creator of our actions. So, I think we covered this in the previous lesson as well. So their reasoning, as we said, is that if Allah is the creator of our actions, then how can He punish and reward us? So they said that man is the creator of his own actions. So by doing this, they basically claimed that things occur in Allah's creation what He does not have any power or control over. Therefore, this is tantamount to saying that there's another creator alongside Allah. There are other creators alongside Allah. So when they say the word adl, justice, this word on its own sounds very nice and very, it seems like these people want to establish justice, but what they really mean is that true justice can only be if man creates his own actions outside of Allah's control and power. Only this then is justice. Why? Because then he fully deserves to be rewarded and to be punished, because he's acted of his own will, of his own power, completely outside of Allah's will and Allah's power. And then they label this as justice. So just by using the word justice does not mean that your doctrine is correct. This doctrine is completely false. It's a completely false doctrine. And this is because Allah is the creator of our actions. We don't create our own actions. Allah is the creator. We are the doers of our actions. There's a difference between the Khaliq, the one who creates, and the Fa'il, the Fa'il. Allah created our physical bodies. He gave us our form. He gave us a heart, various limbs. He gave us a mind with which to think with, and the ability to choose, the ability to reason, the ability to decide. So we choose our actions through the faculties Allah gave to us, and we do our actions. But Allah is the creator of our actions. It's very simple. It's very simple. It's like someone creates, it's not the perfect analogy, but if someone creates a robot, as they do make robots nowadays with artificial intelligence, and they give that robot the ability to learn, to receive sensory data, and to make decisions and things like that, then the robot's not the creator of its own actions, right? The creator of its actions is its creator. But the actions which are done by this robot are the actions of the robot, right? So, for example, you can't attribute our actions that we perform that Allah is the doer of those actions, because this would mean that when a person steals, for example, Allah is the doer of the act of stealing. Or when someone does any other repugnant, filthy acts, that Allah is the doer of those acts. That's not true. This is something that the other people on the other extreme, the Jabariyya, that's what they would say, right? So these people say that Allah does not will or create the actions of the servants do it themselves, on one side. On the other side, who are the Jabariyya, they say Allah is the doer, only Allah is the doer. Allah is the doer of everything. They don't make a distinction between who is the creator and who is the doer of the action, right? So when they say al-adal, justice, it all sounds very nice and appealing. But what do they really mean by this? They mean to negate Allah's, the divine decree. Their third principle that they bring is what they call, that they say that we believe in Allah's promises and Allah's threats. Al-wa'ad wal-wa'id. We believe in Allah's promises and in Allah's threats. Now obviously this is true because in the Quran, like the al-wa'ad wal-wa'id, in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal, He makes many promises. Allah has promised the believers paradise. Allah has promised those who believe and do righteous deeds that He will give them authority in the land, right? Allah makes promises. And likewise, Allah makes threats. Allah makes threats of punishment, of disgrace, of humiliation, of punishment in the hellfire. What these people did is they wrongly believed that just like Allah never withholds on His promise, likewise Allah never withholds from His threat. Right? So look at the reasoning here. If Allah makes a promise, will He ever break that promise? The answer is no. If Allah makes a threat, will He ever fail to fulfill that threat? The Mu'tazila, they made it from their principles. They said Allah will always implement His threat. Once He's made the threat, He will always implement His threat. With this wrong way of thinking, this then led them to expel Muslims from the fold of Islam, because when they saw in the Quran that Allah Azza wa Jal, He's making a threat for a person who commits a particular sin, for example, like for example someone who kills another person, or someone who commits fornication, or someone who, and they see in the Quran that Allah has made a threat for a particular sin, then because of this wrong belief that they had, that Allah's threats are like His promises, this then led them to reason that any person who falls into a major sin, or who falls into something upon which is Allah's threat, Allah must fulfill that threat. Allah must fulfill that threat. And therefore, as a result, this led them to expel people from the fold of Islam. The correct belief is that if Allah makes a threat, it's not binding that He must carry out the threat, right? Because He can forgive a person. There could be asbab, there could be other reasons for which the threat is not implemented. This is unlike Al-wa'ad, the promise. When a promise is made, that promise will be fulfilled. Right? So a threat is not like a promise. They wrongly treated both of these things to be the same, and they fell into error. So when they say al-wa'ad wal-wa'id, what they really mean is that the one who falls into a major sin, he will enter into hellfire forever. And then they took certain texts in the Quran where Allah Azza wa Jal, He mentions that khalidan fiha, right? That a person will remain therein for abada, forever, right? And the scholars explain that these texts mean for a very long time. It doesn't always mean that they will be eternally in the hellfire. So there are some texts which are like that, which for some sins, very grave, serious sins, that a very severe threat is made that this person will remain therein abadan. But the interpretation of that is it can mean for a very, very, very long time. It does not mean that a person will never ever come out of hellfire for that particular sin. So they misunderstood those texts, those verses, and therefore they said a person who falls into these major sins will remain eternally in the hellfire, which therefore means he is a disbeliever. So look at this wrong way of thinking. You've misunderstood the nature of a promise and the nature of a threat. You made them to be the same. Then on the basis of that, you have misunderstood verses in the Quran, and then on the basis of that, you've declared Muslims, sinful Muslims, to be eternally in the hellfire. All of this is a mistake. And then all of this is clothed with what? With these labels, al-wa'd wal-wa'id. This is from our, this is our foundation. And an ignorant person wouldn't know any better. The fourth principle they had was a principle that they called al-manzila bayna manzilatayn. Al-manzila bayna manzilatayn. And what this means is, it literally means a position in between two positions. A position in between two positions. This is connected to the previous one, right? So if anyone fell into major sin, then they would hold that in the hereafter, in the next life, that person would be eternally in the hellfire. That then leaves the question, okay, then how do we treat him in the life of this world? Right? So if his status in the hereafter is going to be he's eternally in the hellfire for committing major sins in this life, then how do we treat him in the life of this world itself? What do we say about him? Do we say he's a believer? Do we treat him as a believer? Or do we say he is a disbeliever? So they went for the view that they said, okay, we're not going to say he's a believer, nor are we going to say he's a disbeliever in the life of this world. But rather we will say that he is in an intermediate position. He's an in-between position. Right? Al-manzila bayna manzilatayn. And this is also an innovated false belief, because either a person is a believer or he is a disbeliever in the life of this world, in what is apparent outwardly to us. Right? Obviously there are hypocrites, but we don't have knowledge of that. So in order to cover up the previous doctrine, the third doctrine of what they call al-wa'd wal-wa'id, they realize, well, okay, how do we treat if major sinners are disbelievers in the hereafter, in the hellfire forever, then how do we treat them in this world then? So they came up with this doctrine in order to kind of patch up the previous doctrine. And this is false. This is false. And in fact, it was actually on this very point that the Mu'tazila, they separated as a group from the major scholars of the Tabi'een, from Al-Hasan al-Basri rahimahullah. They used to sit in his gatherings, and this issue came up about the major sinners. What is their status? What is their position? And the head of this group, Wasil bin Ata, he said to Hasan al-Basri, as for me, I believe they are neither believers nor disbelievers. I believe they are in a position between two positions. And then, he left, and then he departed and abandoned the gatherings of Al-Hasan al-Basri. Right? Hasan al-Basri is an alim, a scholar, who took knowledge from the Sahaba, and these people, they broke off as a sect. So this is their fourth principle, And their fifth principle is known as Al-Amr bil-Ma'ruf wal-Nahi anil Munkar, which means to command the good and to prohibit the evil. And this is a very beautiful sounding, name for a principle. Allah Azza wa Jal, He commands us in the Quran, and He praises those people who command the good and prohibit the evil. And so they turn this into one of their foundations, that to command the good and prohibit the evil. What do they really mean by this? What they mean by this is that whenever we see injustice from the rulers, then it is obligatory to revolt against them and to end their injustice. And by this now they are opposing another foundation in the religion, which is the third principle in the 6 principles that we're going to look at next, inshallah ta'ala. But anyway, they said that whenever injustice appears from the rulers, we have to physically put an end to it. And this is commanding the good and prohibiting the evil. And they turned it into a foundation. And by doing this, they are opposing the Sunnah, because the Sunnah, as we shall see inshallah ta'ala in the third of these 6 principles, is that it is obligatory to remain united behind a ruler, whether that ruler is righteous or whether that ruler is sinful, whether that ruler is just or whether that ruler is unjust, right? Whether he's unjust, whether he's fair or whether he's tyrannical and oppressive. The Sunnah has come to prohibit from this revolt and this rebellion, as we shall see inshallah ta'ala. Anyway, the point being, so here's another example of a group, the Mu'tazila, and it's a good illustration to show how when these innovations appeared, then people took these innovations as their religion and they gave them Islamic labels which we find in the Sharia, right, of commanding the good and prohibiting the evil, justice, al-wa'ad, the promise, al-wa'id, the threat, tawheed, singling out Allah in worship. And they applied them to innovated beliefs and innovated ideas. And then we only looked at one sect here, Mu'tazila, but imagine now you apply this to, for example, the Sufis and the specific words that they use. And then you apply it to the people of Kalam, Ilmul Kalam, and they have their own labels, right? And every group comes along and he starts using the Islamic terms and Islamic labels like Jama'ah, like unity. But what they mean by unity is not the unity in the book and the Sunnah. They say Jama'ah, a group. What they mean by Jama'ah is not the Jama'ah that's intended in the Sunnah. They say Imam. And what they mean by Imam is not the Imam that's intended in the Quran and the Sunnah. So the situation arises then that everybody now is using labels and terms, and these terms are religious terms. They are Sharia terms, many of them, like even now today. But what do they really mean by these terms? When people come and they speak about unity, for example, what do you mean by unity? Right? So this is why we have to be careful that not everybody who comes and speaks, not every individual, not every group or party who comes and speaks with these terms and these words, of justice and tawheed and unity and oneness, and what do they actually mean? Is it a foundation from the foundations of the Sunnah? Is it a meaning that the Sunnah has come with, or is it something else that they intend? And especially in our times today, the reason why this is very important to understand, I'll give you just one quick illustration to show you the type of confusion that this enters people into. If you look at a lot of people who are involved in charity work, for example, let's take this example. There are many Muslims who, obviously, from their sincerity and from their desire for goodness, they see many calamities taking part in the Muslim world. So they'll see, for example, Muslims being harmed in Burma, for example, or what's happening in Syria, for example. So obviously they have sincere intentions and they genuinely want to help Muslims. So because of their ignorance, of the foundations of the religion, and One of the reasons for this, as the Sheikh will explain, is that it is people don't really turn and study, the usul, the foundations, and they remain upon jahl. And when they remain upon jahl, they can't see things clearly for what they are. So those people today who work in this field of, for example, relief work, charity work, going to Muslim lands, feeding the poor, going to where Muslims are oppressed, you'll see that these people are very prone, and they end up being very inclined to the types of ideas of the Khawarij and the Mu'tazila, right? So they will tend to speak about, for example, unity. We need to be united. But when they speak about unity, that the unity that they are speaking of is not the unity that the Quran and Sunnah has come with. The unity they are speaking of is, it's like what the Ikhwanis, what they basically do, just to gather numbers, just to overlook the differences, overlook the actual true and real reasons why the Muslims are divided, split, weak, and then just call for like an artificial type of unity that is only being said because of the sad state of affairs of the Muslims, right? Regardless of what the actual true underlying causes are. So you'll see these people always coming out with like, one ummah, and we are one, nation, and we should be one, we should be united, and it's all upon jahl. It's upon ignorance. It's not upon knowledge and insight. Secondly, from these people, you'll also see they will have a resentment and a hatred towards the rulers. They will blame all of the woes and evils to the rulers, and they will be prone to the ideas of the Khawarij, of the extremists, right? Ideas of revolting, rebelling, replacing the rulers, removing the tyrants. And in turn, you will find them having resentment even to the scholars of Ahlul Sunnah, who speak with the foundations of the Sunnah, right? Of obeying the rulers, being patient, and things like that. So, but you will see that they're using all these labels. We need to be united. We need to establish justice. We need to this. We need to this. And so this is where the problem lies. You can see clearly that these people have lived in ignorance. They haven't studied the usul of the religion in detail, and they're just affected by their emotions, and they can't decipher these many layers of ideas and beliefs and the labels that are attached to them. So this is unfortunately a very, very sad situation. But you can see how even sincere people who want to help other Muslims, how they can be caught in these webs of deception, webs of confusion, and not be able to see things for what they really are. And all of this comes back down to not studying the religion and not understanding it upon the way of the Salaf, and not dedicating oneself, one's time to the religion and to its study as it truly should be studied. Right? People don't, do that, and as a result, they are victim to this disease of ignorance, which leads them to these kind of scenarios. The Shaykh goes on after this to explain the fitna in the time of Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah. And in fact, what he intends to do over the next couple of pages, he's basically explaining that despite all of these splitting and differing, there are times and situations in which Allah Azza wa Jal, He sends scholars who are revivers of the religion. Right? They revive the religion. They rectify the wrongs or the deviations in belief that came before. And they unite the Muslims somewhat, and they give strength to Tawheed and the Sunnah. One of those Imams was Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah. As you know, that one of the great tribulations to occur was the tribulation of ilmul kalam, this philosophy, this rhetoric in speaking about Allah, His names. And Imam Ahmad was a great scholar who stood in the face of this evil after many of these Mu'tazila and Jahmiyyah, they had convinced the rulers that this doctrine was the truth, right? That to deny Allah's names and attributes was the truth. and that anyone who opposes this is calling to disbelief. So by convincing the rulers of this, the rulers then in turn persecuted thousands upon thousands of scholars, and many were killed and slaughtered as well. But Imam Ahmad came and he defended the Sunnah. Allah gave him victory because he showed patience, right? He was imprisoned, he was beaten, he was lashed, and he stood and he was made to argue with the innovators in the court of the ruler, various rulers. And it went on for about 6, 7, 8 years, maybe a bit longer. But eventually, his patience, was rewarded with victory. And so as a result of that, the Mu'tazila, they declined rapidly, and everyone hated them, and the Sunnah became apparent, right? So here's an example of how, someone, Allah Azza wa sends a person, as we see in the hadith, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَبْعَثُ إِلَى هَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ على رأس كل مئة سنة من يجدد لها دينها. Indeed, Allah will send to this nation at the head of every 100 years one who will revive its religion for it. Authentic hadith, authenticated by Shaykh al-Bani rahimahullah ta'ala. However, Imam Ahmad, the Shaykh makes a point that there was no one to give physical or financial support to Imam Ahmad. So in his time, in his actual time, the religion didn't kind of become manifest openly, right? Because there was no one to come and to give him physical and financial support in order to spread what he was upon. This didn't happen in his time. Likewise, in the time of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, this is now 700 years after the Hijrah, roughly. In fact, before that, the Shaykh goes on to explain how even the Messenger of Allah, when he went to call his da'wah, he would go out looking for people to support him, looking for people to give him physical protection from the polytheists so that he can continue making his call without any hindrance, without any aggression. And he would go to the various tribes. However, it's strange that Allah Azza wa Jal, the actual man that was able to protect him, was his polytheist uncle. He wasn't even a Muslim, right? His uncle Abu Talib was the one who actually protected him, and this protection wasn't on the basis of the religion. It was because on the basis of like the tribal pride, that because he's my nephew and he's from my tribe, and because he's the son of my deceased brother, then I will protect him, right? So look at how this person whom Allah appointed to protect the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam from the hostilities of the pagan Quraysh, and he shielded him from the disbelievers, from the other polytheists, and he aided him, he supported him, and enabled him to spread his message, even though he himself did not believe in the message, even though he knew that the message was truth. But it was his tribal pride and his ancestral pride that prevented him from accepting Islam. In any case, you can see here that this was that when you make a call, then you've got to make the call and you've got to have protection as well. But not every scholar, not every reviver has protection and has physical or financial support. Imam Ahmad did not have physical support, didn't have anyone to protect him. He was alone by himself. But what he did, then obviously the effects of that were known many centuries later. The same thing happened with Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. So as you know, Ibn Taymiyyah came in the 7th century, and by the time, if you remember, we discussed what happened in the 1st century, then the 2nd century, the roots of the various orientations, ilmul kalam, tasawwuf, falsafa, ra'i, whatever, and all of these proliferated until by the time you reach the 6th and 7th centuries, there's so much confusion in the Muslim nation that no one can actually see what is the madhab of the Salaf anymore, right? So we start from here and then it kind of mushrooms and proliferates, and it's like as if there's like a cloud of confusion and no one can see, okay, what actually is what's the way of the Salaf, right? And Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah came at that point in time. And what he did, because he had access and because he acquired the actual works of the Salaf in the hundreds that other people didn't, and he managed to verify what the actual madhab of the Salaf was, then he began to clarify and refute all of these various groups systematically. He refuted the Khawarij, the Rafida, the people of Kalam, the philosophers, right, the Batiniya. He didn't leave a sect or a group or an individual who erred or who deviated, except that he wrote about him and clarified his mistakes. So through Ibn Taymiyyah, the Ummah was once more connected back to the actual way of the Salaf. And through his books and through his works, we get a window back to the Salaf. But there was no one to support Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. There was no one to support him, and he himself was oppressed, he was imprisoned, his enemies plotted against him, they would complain to the rulers to imprison him, even though they knew that he himself was a truthful man, a brave man, a courageous man, an honest man, and he was well versed in the very sciences. But because of their bigotry and partisanship, because they were Ash'aris, Sufis, their partisanship and their bigotry to these doctrines, to these innovative doctrines, led them to commit injustices against him. There was no one to support him. There was no one to defend him. No one spent any money upon him. Then the Shaykh goes on to mention the case of Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab rahimahullah ta'ala, and his case is different, because with the case of Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab rahimahullah, who is the author of the 6 principles, he is the one who actually then connected this latter part of this ummah to the works of Ibn Taymiyyah and made them popular, and to the works of likewise Imam Ahmad, the madhab of Imam Ahmad as well. So unlike Imam Ahmad and unlike Ibn Taymiyyah, Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin al-Wahhab, he found someone who was willing to support him financially, and to support him physically, to support him militarily. And this, of course, was Muhammad ibn Saud, and they established an alliance. And so here now, he found a way to spread the message of Tawheed in that region, and he also had physical support as well. The point that the Shaykh is mentioning behind all of this is to show that the da'wah to Allah Azza wa Jal and the spread of the truth happens through one of 2 men. A man who is a caller to Allah, and he does not fear anybody, and he speaks the truth, and he stands for and he defends the truth. Right? So this man is one who will spread and open up, spread da'wah. So Allah spreads the truth by this type of man. Or the second type of man is the brave, courageous person who's willing to stand and to physically to go out and to fight and to remove the obstacles and the barriers and the hindrances and to pave the way for the da'wah to take place. So Allah aids the religion by one of these 2 men. So in the case of Imam Ahmad ibn Taymiyyah, they are obviously of the first type, right? Through knowledge, and they had patience, and they spread the truth, and they spoke the truth, and they feared not the blame of anybody. And then the second type of person here are the likes of some of the rulers who aided and supported the Tawheed and the Sunnah, and spent from their wealth, and they physically fought themselves, and they removed obstacles and barriers. So Allah aids and spreads His religion by way of these 2 types of men. And so here you have an alliance between an alim and a scholar who speaks the truth, and a ruler who's willing to go and to fight and to remove obstacles in front of the truth. Right? And so after this, then obviously the books of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah became more popular through Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, and that proliferated and spread, and that's why today we are able to go back and to recognize what was the madhab of the Salaf. What was the madhab of the Salaf? And without that, we would have been lost and confused. The Shaykh gave this, this treatment over these 4 or 5 pages to come to an important point. And this important point, in fact, before making this point, he mentions an example of a scholar who was taught in a university in the Al-Azhar University in Egypt. Al-Azhar is like, it's a place where you have Sufis and Ash'aris. That's what they study, that's what they learn, that's what they come out with. And then he wanted to, and he was a specialist in Ilmul Kalam, Mantiq, in logic, philosophy, right? And he wanted to come out and he wanted to refute the books of Ibn Taymiyyah. So he began to read the books of Ibn Taymiyyah. And after systematically reading them and studying them with the intention of refuting them, spending many months, he then announced that he actually made tawbah and became a Salafi himself. And that's because before that he did not know what was the madhab of the Salaf. As we said, that the madhab of the Salaf was lost. But when he read the books of Ibn Taymiyyah and he saw that the truth was in what Ibn Taymiyyah is saying, even though he himself was attempting to refute Ibn Taymiyyah, he couldn't deny the truth. So the point being that if this is an alim, think of this is an alim, right, who is well versed in philosophy, ilmul kalam and things like that. The Shaykh, by giving this example, he wants to point out that when people do not study the Salafi methodology, the manhaj of the Salaf that was revived by the likes of these scholars, then this will keep people upon ignorance, and they will not really come to know what was the true and real message that the messenger came with in these foundations of the religion. They remain upon ignorance, and so long as they remain upon ignorance, then they will remain upon disunity and splitting and differing. They will remain upon that state so long as they do not go back and actually study the madhab of the Salaf. And then they will be led to this scenario or this situation where they will think, or where they will say, hang on, what we believe, of our doctrines and what those other people believe of their doctrines, all of them are correct. All of these are correct, right? This is from unity, right? That you remain upon your doctrine, you remain upon your doctrine, you remain upon your doctrine, and we should be united. This is what is unity. And that anyone who speaks otherwise, he must be mad or he must be insane. This is what led to the scenario that Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab says at the very end of this principle, وَسَارَ الْإِجْتِمَاعُ فِي الدِّينِ لَا يَقُولُهُ إِلَّا زِنْدِيقٌ أَوْ مَجْنُونٌ. That unity in the religion was something that nobody spoke of except a heretic or someone who was mad. Right? The situation reached this particular level. So the Shaykh says this is what leads many people to remain upon this ignorance, is that they do not truly study the methodology of the Salaf. Shaykh then gives a quick example to illustrate that the type of blind partisanship. He says, once I heard on the radio, the Arabic radio, I just happened to be listening to it, and there was a Muslim lady who was debating with a big well-known doctor. Right, this person is a doctor, right? That's his profession. And they were debating about a particular issue about whether to swear by other than Allah is shirk or not. To swear by other than Allah, whether it is shirk or not, right? It's like a minor form of shirk. So this doctor was saying, in our view, we do not hold that it is shirk. And the lady was arguing with him and giving him the evidences. These are the evidences. Here's a hadith. Here's this. Here's that. Whatever. And this man would say, "Look, this is only what the extremists say. This is the saying of the extremists, right? The ones who say that swearing by other than Allah is shirk. As for us, أما نحن فلا نرى ذلك. As for us, we do not hold this. Like he's speaking in a manner like we, the we of respect, and we don't see this. We don't believe this." Even though he himself is not giving any proof or any evidence for his opinion, he's just saying, we don't believe this. This is not our opinion, right? Sheikh is giving this example to show how, look, many of these people who become professionals in a worldly profession or a worldly science, they somehow believe that their statement in the religion, they can just simply say, look, we believe, it's our opinion, it's our view. And, that this is something that, anyone who opposes that must be an extremist. So he says, this is like a strange and amazing situation that we find today, that you find amongst the people, that this is what, like a phenomenon that you see happening. Then finally, the Sheikh then goes on to discuss the final sentence about, anyone who speaks about actual unity, he's treated to be like a heretic or a mad person. Sheikh has a brief comment upon this, and he says that this is true and real. No one calls to actual unity and removal of differing. Removal of differing means removal of the innovations. That's what the real solution is. That no one speaks in this manner except that he is considered to be a deficient person in his understanding. But as for the evolved person, the mutatawwir, the advanced or the progressive person, or the contemporary person who understands, such a person doesn't call to these types of ideas. Right? So in other words, the scales have been turned the other way around. That anyone who says, look, don't invent these new jama'at, there's only one jama'ah. It is the jama'ah that was mentioned by the Messenger of Allah. Anyone who speaks with this type of language, this person is deficient in his intellect. He's backward, he's regressive. Right? And anyone who maintains the status quo, he is progressive. He is advanced. He is, So unfortunately, this poison entered into the minds of the people, and especially those who are affected by Western culture and, the ways of thinking and Western ideas of justice, democracy, and things like that. You find this often from those types of people as well. So this is the end of what Sheikh Muhammad Aman has to say, and we'll finish very quickly. Going back to what Sheikh Zaid said, he said, and we'll conclude this issue here, which is that being united upon the truth is a foundation from the foundations of this religion. Right? Unity is upon the truth, upon the haqq. It is upon holding the rope of Allah. It is not unity for the sake of unity itself, for the sake of just collecting bodies together. This can never take place. He says this is a mighty foundation of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, the righteous Salaf, and every action, every statement of the people of the Sunnah, it emanates out of the Book of Allah, the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah upon the way of the Salaf. And they are the ones who avoid all of the causes of splitting, all of the causes of differing, and that's because they avoid the innovations, and they understand that the reason why the Muslim nation is divided and split is because of these innovations have entered into the hearts of the people, the minds of the people. They've poisoned and infected their minds, hearts and souls, and so therefore we must distinguish between the truth and falsehood if we want true unity. As a result of this, then, there are two categories of people that exist. The first category of people are those who understand the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of His Messenger upon the way it was intended. Upon the way it was intended. And then they call to that in the da'wah. This is what they call to. And through this they are calling to unity. They are calling to reciting the book as it truly should be recited, understanding it as it truly should be understood, deriving rulings from it in the correct manner, making halal what is halal, haram what is haram, and taking the whole of the religion with its correct understanding. Right? These are the people upon the way of the Sunnah, the Jama'ah, the way of the Salaf, and they shun every innovation, right? And they are calling to unity upon this. That's the first group. The second group, who will always exist in every time and place as well, they are a people who turned away from the truth, or from understanding the truth as it should be understood. And then they split and divided because they wallowed in innovations And alongside this, they consider themselves to be upon the truth. If you recall at the beginning of this lesson, we mentioned the Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila, just by way of illustration, they speak about Tawheed. They speak about Al-Adal, justice. They speak about Allah's promise and threat. All these nice labels, commanding the good, prohibiting the evil. Right? They consider themselves to be upon the truth by way of these labels, which represent false innovator doctrines. Then now apply this to every other group, right? You have the Sufis, you have Jama'atul Tabligh, you have Jama'atul Ikhwan, you have Hizbut Tahrir, you have all these other groups, you have the Khawarij, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, these type of groups, right? Claiming that they are upon justice and jihad and whatever else, calling for the Khilafah, calling for the Sharia, right? These labels, Khilafah, Sharia, Imam, Jama'ah, right? All these people consider themselves to be upon the truth. And they claim that they are the ones who are calling to unity. Obviously, unity upon their false doctrines. Right? And so, because these people will exist, this means, therefore, that there will have to be an ongoing struggle and an ongoing battle between the two groups. Between the first group, who are upon the way of the Salaf, and between this faction who are all divided into whatever innovation that they have wallowed in, and their minds and their hearts and their souls have been poisoned with. So this struggle will be continuous and continue. It will remain. And so for that reason, the Shaykh says, those who are upon the way of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, who follow the manhaj of the Salaf, they do not allow their souls to remain silent about Ahlul Bid'ah, about the people of Bid'ah who appear and spring in their society. So any person who comes along and starts speaking with the innovation of some of these sects, right? They will speak about them. They don't remain silent about the likes of these people. Like you see in every society now, even in the West, you see many of these ignorant callers appearing, right? For example, in Britain and elsewhere, you see these people coming. Like your Hamzat Sortsis, his Muhammad Hijab, and these other ignoramuses. And when they debate with the atheists, they are bringing the goods of the falasifa and the goods of the people of Kalam, Ilmul Kalam, right? And they're using their arguments and they're coming out with the same type of language and speech and falling into tremendous errors, right? And people are listening to this, taking it entertainment, believing in the soundness of these arguments, and thinking that this is da'wah to Allah, when really it's not. It's just going back and reviving the deen of the Mu'tazila, the Falasifa, the Ash'ariyya, and their false corrupt statements, right? And they are perpetuating the causes of differing and splitting. And then at the same time, they will be calling for unity. What unity? The unity that they are calling to is not the unity of the Quran and the Sunnah. And as for those who call to actual unity, right, who call to the usul of Ahl Sunnah, right, then this is inevitable, that this struggle is between the people who stick to the way of the Salaf and between those people who are upon Jahl and Hawa and upon these other ways and means. So the point being that this is from the qada and the qadr of Allah Azza wa Jal, that there will be those who follow the way of the Salaf, and there will be those who will be wallowing upon innovation or aspects of innovation. And the necessity of the struggle is something that cannot be escaped from. And for that reason, Ahlul Sunnah do not remain silent about the innovations which spring up or which are revived in their society, because this is the very reason and the very cause of the differing and the splitting in the first place. And obviously we've come to the end of time, but perhaps in the next lesson we'll mention how Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he explained that the reason for the demise of the very first ruling dynasty, the Umayyad, why they came to an end, is because the last of their rulers, he made a friendship with Al-Ja'ad bin Dirham. He made friendship with Al-Ja'ad, the one who came with the innovations of the Jahmiyyah. And so because this ruler supported innovation ahead of innovation, that nation, that ruling dynasty was ended. It came to an end. Because whenever a person deviates and swerves, Allah brings that to an end. And then he went on to explain how in both the eastern parts of the Islamic nation and the western parts of the Islamic nation, in the western part first, when they turn to the innovations of, ta'til, negating Allah's names and attributes, and the extremism in Sufism, Allah sent the Crusaders. He sent the Crusaders from Europe, right, to attack the Muslims from that side. And then when on the other side, from Khorasan is over that side, Persia and beyond, when they were upright, then they were given authority upon the land. And then when they deviated as well, then Allah sent the Mongols from the east, who swept all across Asia and reached all the way into Anatolia, and even they went into Europe as well, right? And the reason for that was that those people, they entered into ta'til and heresy and ilhad, right? These deviations. And of course, from that we can even extend this after the time of Ibn Taymiyyah, and we can say that when the Muslims fell into more corruption after the time of Ibn Taymiyyah, then Allah Azza wa Jal sent the colonialists, the imperialists, right? So He sent the Dutch, the French, the Spanish, the British. What did they do? They went all across. They went to the Far East, they went to India, they went to Egypt, they went to all these places and colonized Algeria, North Africa, and they colonized all these lands. Well, what's the reason for that? The reason for that is, the bid'ah, ta'til, ilhad, tafarruq, ikhtilaf. What's it caused by? Anyway, so maybe we'll bring some quotes from Ibn Taymiyyah in the next lesson where he mentions these specific things to show that true unity is a return to the understanding of the way of the Salaf, and that true unity cannot be achieved unless we purify the hearts and the minds of the Muslims from the innovations that led to that disunity in the first place. And this is only done by people who adhere to the way of the Salaf. Their unity is the genuine unity. Every other unity, even if someone calls to you and says, let's be united in order to, every other basis for unity is not true unity. Even if someone was to come and say, look, there's Muslims suffering in Burma, let's now be united, that is not the basis for the unity that the Quran and Sunnah speaks with, right? And our emotions cannot be led to ignore this fact. And that's what I said to you before. I gave the examples that many people who are led by their emotions, they might be sincere in their emotions, but that does not mean that what they are speaking with is actually correct. And many of these people are ignorant and they don't study, and that's why they have these how do you call it? It's you have these hopes which are never going to materialize. Right? These people who want to call for the unity of the ummah, and it's all based upon emotion. It's not going to lead to actual unity. Right? It's wishful thinking. Wishful thinking. So we need to be clear about these issues and not to be led by our emotions, and to understand history, understand the reasons behind things, and to stick to the book and the sunnah, because that is the only means of deliverance. Anyway, that concludes our discussion of the second principle. In the next lesson, we are going to start the third principle. The third principle is really an extension of the second principle, and the second principle cannot be actualized or completed except by the third principle. So with that, we'll conclude our lesson there for today. Inshallah, we'll continue next week. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.